coffee. En dan de Moccona. Dat is het. Moccona heeft meer.
Apparently, she was a Kiwi born in South Africa. I always assumed she was German.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, but probably people remember the original version of that.
Yeah.
Most. So
Yeah.
Moccona's changed its instant recipe. It's not to everyone's taste. Has either of you noticed a difference?
I have zero experience of Moccona, old or new, I'm afraid. Don't really do instant coffee.
I normally start work at 5 o'clock in the morning, so, if there isn't enough blood in my caffeine system by 8 o'clock, then there's something wrong.
Several gallons consumed.
Basically, yes.
The Brisbane Courier Mail says hundreds of consumers have posted negative reviews about what they say is a big change in the taste of Moccona's classic medium roast number 5. There's even a petition going to make the company revert to the previous blend. The company is taking the feedback to heart and is saddened by the response.
People really don't like it when you mess around with their things. Remember when there was that whole thing with Milo, to the flavour of Milo changing?
Oh, yeah.
A couple of years ago.
Yes, it was.
And new Coke and Cherry Coke and...
Yeah, you mess with the classic at your peril, I reckon, and when it comes to things like this.
Don't mess with the classic.
If Moccona is a classic.
Seeing as you're on, in your special honour, Gordon Ramsay's intermittent cooking theory. I'd like to know what you think of this. We're doing scrambled eggs all wrong. Don't season the eggs, don't beat them, cook them with butter. Take them on and off the heat throughout the cooking process.
Yeah, I have got a lot of problems with Gordon's scrambled egg theory. I have scrambled eggs most days, actually, and I'm a big egg eater. I love scrambled eggs in particular, and it's the quickest eggs that you can make also. But he puts them into the pot. There's a pot straight away, which is different from what I do. And he puts them in whole with some butter, and then he whisks them in the pot, and he puts them over a high heat, and he says to take them off the heat and put them back on, take them off. I do just about the opposite of that. I put my eggs in a pan, mixed in with the milk, already beaten, over a medium heat, and just very slowly scramble them till they're just cooked. So you don't want to have them like super, super scrambled. And you get beautiful, perfect scrambled eggs in about 30 to 45 seconds.
Is there a thermodynamic law we've hitherto been unaware of? What's the virtue of putting something on the heat, then taking it off the heat?
Well, I suppose he wants to cook it for a little bit and then let the residual heat cook it through more. That's my guess with that. But I haven't actually tried his. Now I'm going to have to try it, of course.
It sounds salmonella-licious.
Well, he presumably cooks them.
Oh, yes.
But I think with scrambled eggs, you want them. I personally like them to be just cooked, not like rubbery scramble and super scrambled.
Oh, yeah. But it's Gordon Ramsay too. He'd berate them. He'd swear at them a few times. That gets them a bit more sort of coagulated.
Make them feel really bad about themselves.
Yeah. That's what you want. You scrambled eggs with lots of self-doubt and pity, and
That's why you don't need to season them.
Trembling on the plate.
Presumably.
Not many current affairs shows would tackle scrambled eggs in the way that we did.
It's a big topic
Today.
Oh,
yeah.
Huge.
Thank you for your input, both of you. Now that I hear the music, Andrew Frame on the panel today. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Nikki.
And a lot of reaction coming in, actually, to you're telling us about your mother too. Interesting reaction on the text. And Nikki Bazant has been with us as well. Thanks, Nikki.
Kia ora, Jim.
Kia ora, and we are back tomorrow. Thanks for your company, everybody. Checkpoint is on the way.
Tauti mare, hoa mai hei kōrero, kei te haere, hei kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. Tonight, the government has announced a crackdown on work visas for international students. Desperation in Lombok. More than 50,000 people are now homeless following the weekend's devastating quake. 50,000. Auckland secondary school students asked for a $100 per week, teachers asked for a $100 per week housing allowance. Business confidence in the Labour government. Is pessimism inevitable or fear? The KFC test, property managers come under fire for asking for the bank statements of prospective clients. And he's scared of heights, but our reporter Timothy Brown went to Queenstown to become a kind of human catapult.
3, 2, 1.
Holy sh**!
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. Taranaki High School students who were in a bus that crashed are being assessed by ambulance staff. The Inglewood High School bus crashed near the intersection of State Highway 3 and Leper Road at 3:30. A St John's spokesperson says 6 ambulances and an intensive care paramedic are at the scene. She says most of the passengers are understood to have suffered minor to moderate injuries. Bad weather in the area meant it was impossible to send a helicopter to the crash site. The police are ferrying students back to Inglewood High School and advise parents to meet their children there. The government has made the first strike against what it views as the exploitation of the student visa regime, confirming a range of significant changes. One is the removal of a visa foreign students can use to work in New Zealand as long as they have an employer offer of full-time work. At the moment, new students studying below degree level, such as at Polytechnic, can work for a total of 2 years once they've finished, but that will reduce to 1 year. However, if they study outside of Auckland, they keep the 2 years. Those studying at degree level will be able to work for 3 years on an open visa. The Immigration Minister Ian Lees-Galloway says the sector was consulted before the changes were finalised.
There's no longer going to be a focus on bums on seats. We will be focused on providing high quality, high value education and making sure that the international education sector is one that's focused on value, not on volume.
Ian Lees-Galloway. The Education Minister Chris Hipkins has warned a housing allowance proposed for teachers would raise expectations among other public sector workers. The Post-Primary Teachers Association is calling for payments of up to $100 a week for secondary school teachers working in high-cost areas. Chris Hipkins says the government would need to consider the knock-on effects of agreeing to that.
If you were going to do something around, geographical location for teachers and the cost of living in Auckland for teachers, then I think we would end up with an expectation that there'd be something similar for nurses and for other public service workers who would face the same cost pressures. And so we'd have to consider all of that in the discussions about whether that's something that the government would consider.
Chris Hipkins says he'll get advice from officials on the proposal. Authorities on the Indonesian island of Lombok are continuing rescue efforts in villages and towns devastated by Sunday's earthquake. The death toll in the quake stands at 105, with hundreds injured and whole villages flattened. The ABC's David Lipson reports.
The National Disaster Management Agency now estimates 50,000 people have been left homeless. All along the roads in the north, people hold cardboard boxes out to passing traffic, hoping for donations of food, water and cash to rebuild their homes. Further north, a humanitarian crisis is looming. In some remote areas, motorbikes and small vehicles are the only way to get through. There are also reports of humanitarian aid being looted as people get more desperate for food and water.
David Lipson on Lombok. The Greater Wellington Regional Council has voted to make changes to the region's new bus service just weeks after it was launched. The decision was made at a meeting today of the Council's Sustainable Transport Committee. The changes will include extending services such as the number 18 route and increasing bus capacity. Regional Councillor Sue Kedgley says today's meeting heard loud and clear the problems the new service is causing.
I feel distressed by the experiences, the delays, the frustrations that so many commuters have experienced over the last few weeks. And I think as a council we have to apologise to every Wellingtonian that's been inconvenienced.
Sue Kedgley says the changes need to be made as soon as possible. A senior cabinet minister says any further claims for legal expenses of MPs named in a suit by Winston Peters would be considered if and when they come before cabinet. Taxpayers will fork out an estimated $20,000 to cover the legal fees of 4 former National Party ministers sued by the Deputy Prime Minister over the leak of his superannuation details. It emerged late last year Winston Peters had initiated legal action against Bill English, Paula Bennett, Stephen Joyce and Anne Tolley the day before the September election. The Attorney-General David Parker says there could be further claims.
I wouldn't be surprised if they make an application to the Crown for further covering their costs. If they do, that will be assessed by Crown law according to long-settled principles as to whether this arises in their personal capacity or as a consequence of holding ministerial office.
David Parker, the Attorney-General. It's 5 minutes past 5.
Sport, the Mainland Tactics coach Marianne Delaney-Hoshek says she could barely watch the final ANZ Premiership season match that sealed her side's fate. The Central Pulse's 55-48 win over the Northern Mystics meant the Tactics progressed to their first ever semi-final against the Steel tonight, and Delaney-Hoshek says it's time to turn up the defence against the reigning champions.
We haven't got as many turnovers off them as we usually like to get. So from Jane and Tim at the back, we need to try and find a way of increasing our chances. The last game we played them, we didn't make some good decisions, so it's just making sure that we're on top of those. And also the occasion down there, because obviously it's a stadium that's renowned for being really noisy, but we've got absolutely nothing to lose.
Marianne Delaney-Hoshek. Melbourne Storm star Billy Slater has announced his retirement from rugby league, with this NRL season to be his last. The 35-year-old Australia and Queensland fullback made his NRL debut with Melbourne in 2003 and has since played 313 games, winning 2 premierships, 2 Clive Churchill medals and a Dally M medal. Rugby Australia Chief Executive New Zealander Raelene Castle is confident of delivering a record-breaking Women's Rugby World Cup if Australia is granted the right to host in 2021. Castle announced that Newcastle and the Hunter region will host if Australia is successful. The Southern Hemisphere has yet to host the tournament since the concept was introduced in Wales in 1991, despite New Zealand's Black Ferns winning the Cup 5 times. That's the news.
Tonight on Night, Simon Morris continues his search for the perfect movie. Jenny Chu, Young Engineer of the Year, talks about going underground in Auckland and a window on the world of a museum dedicated to failure.
So you strap it onto your head and then it gives you electric shocks for about 15 minutes. And then if you use it for several months, you'll be as beautiful as Linda Evans from Dynasty. It does look like something out of a horror movie.
Learning from our mistakes on Nights. Afternoon news at 7.
The nearest galaxy to us is in fact millions of light years away, and most galaxies are billions of light years away. So these radio bursts may have in fact happened before the Earth existed, even before the Sun existed, and this pulse of radio waves has been kind of chugging its way across the universe and just happens to hit us when we're looking in the right place in the right time with the right telescope.
My head is spinning. Yours must be every day, Richard.
You know, the funny thing is if you're actually working on this stuff, you kind of dig into it and you've got stuff to hold on to. It's actually when you pull back and think about it, this is actually genuinely mind-bending.
It's Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Cloudy with scattered rain in Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay, spreading to Gisborne this evening, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. And for the remainder of the North Island, also Nelson and Marlborough, rain with some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in Taranaki and Waitomo. Rain easing to isolated showers overnight, then becoming fine tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, clearing for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, cloud and patchy light rain, clearing this evening, but returning south of Christchurch tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today, high cloud tomorrow with patchy rain developing. Fiordland, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. In the Chatham Islands, a few light showers turning to rain tomorrow, heavy for a time. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for joining us. We begin tonight with changes to the student visa regime and a crackdown on the exploitation of foreign students. The changes announced in the past hour will make it easier for those studying at degree level to stay and work in New Zealand, but harder for those studying at diploma or certificate level. Now, there will be a transition period, so no student currently here will be adversely affected. The Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, says there was consultation before the final decisions were made.
There's no longer going to be a focus on bums on seats. We will be focused on providing high quality, high value education and making sure that the international education sector is one that's focused on value, not on volume. We took some proposals out to the sector and to the public some months ago, and the consultation was exceptional. We received over 2,000 submissions on our proposals. We are a government that listens, that engages in genuine consultation, and what we are announcing today has changed from our original proposals as a result of that consultation.
Official advice says in the worst case scenario, the number of students coming here could be halved. Worst case. Mr. Lees-Galloway says while there will be some impact on the sector, he doesn't believe it will be that dramatic.
That's why we have provided an additional year for people who are studying towards, or who are working towards registration. So there was a particular issue raised with us around the level 7 non-degree qualification, often a postgraduate diploma. And a lot of people studying those postgraduate diplomas are people with a degree who then want to go on to become teachers. And our response to that has been to provide an additional year on the open work visa for people who are working towards their registration.
But the Minister has backed down on changes that would have affected students on one-year courses like postgraduate diplomas. The education sector lobbied against that change in relation to the effect on students coming here as teacher trainees. We've lost that grab. We're going to come back to it in a sec. I'm just going to cough. Forgive me, the changes come into effect in November. This is all just breaking, but we have an example of the kind of exploitation the Minister wants to stop. It's a young Indian woman who's making a tearful plea for compassion to the Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, after she, alongside her classmates, learned their results are being withheld pending a review of their education provider. Now, the 20 Indian students were studying for business diplomas with the Tasman International Academies on Auckland's Queen Street. A few weeks ago, the group discovered their results were being withheld by NZQA over concerns the course had been mismanaged. And as Zach Fleming reports, the students are now calling on the Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, to intervene.
Preparing to protest.
We can't even think about tomorrow, what's going to happen, see? So it's not a student's fault.
I don't know what we can do. We are totally broken.
These students stuck in the middle.
We wasted our 2 years here. The CEO saying we can't do anything. Why couldn't they do anything, right? The student is facing a lot of problems. We need to arrange money. We need to pay for our next year visa.
The Academy 21-year-old Tanya Anuja studied her business diploma at Tasman International Academies, can't release her results. NZQA is preventing it because of, quote, serious concerns about Tasman's assessment and moderation of student work. And she, alongside more than 20 others, were only told of this the day before she was due to finish 2 weeks ago. And this after students asked NZQA before enrolling if the school was up to scratch. And NZQA responded in writing that yes, it was accredited and suitable. The students say the college failed to properly teach the diploma, and NZQA failed to keep them informed of its concerns, and so now they're the victims, caught in the middle.
We came here for a better future, right? We are kind of like, we couldn't see our future in India. That's why we came here, for a better future, better knowledge, better education. But at the end, they gave us this result, like we can't even think about our future now.
Tasman International Academies occupies 2 floors of a 12-storey building on busy Upper Queen Street. I just caught the lifts up to have a look, and there are still quite a few students attending courses here, despite NZQA's serious concerns about the business diplomas being offered. Since we've been here, more than a dozen students have come and gone from these lifts. I approached Tasman today to ask for an interview, but a spokesperson said that they are working through the issues and declined to comment any further. Ms Anuja says other people in her class who had the same teachers and the same markers, but started earlier than her, were able to graduate without issue a fortnight before her.
The same students who were studying with in our class, they did the same assignments, same everything, so why did they get the result and why we can't get the results?
And for Lakwinder Singh, it's even worse. He transferred to Tasman after being caught up in the demise of NZ National College last year, which was forced to close over ongoing quality issues. Together, both have cost him around $15,000.
My parents are financially, they are totally broken, and I can't even talk to them about my situation right now.
The Tasman students are just the latest victims to be exploited by not fit-for-purpose tertiary education providers or visa agents. In February, the same thing that's happening at Tasman happened to students at the New Zealand Institute of Education. International students with concerns can go to an independent resolution scheme called iStudent Complaints, but it only deals with contractual or financial problems.
We help talk them through what the nature of their complaint is, and then we will contact the provider and see if we can resolve it directly with the provider. And if we can't resolve it with the provider, then we have the power to make a decision, and any decision that we make, the provider is bound by.
Many of the Tasman students' visas expire in 2 weeks. To stay in New Zealand while NZQA completes its investigation, they'll have to pay another $250 for a temporary visa. The students are planning on protesting outside the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment on Queen Street in Auckland tomorrow. It's just a short walk down the road from Tasman, and all they want is their results released.
If we won't get positive outcome, then we might go for a hunger strike as well. We are ready for that. So we don't have any other option. So we are ready to fight for ourselves.
We will go for a hunger strike and we will fight till our death.
Fight till your death?
Yeah, because that's our life, that's our future.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Well, in the past hour, we asked Immigration Minister Ian Les-Galloway, who's been making this announcement today, about those students and their plight. He spoke to our political editor, Jane Patterson.
I really feel for these students. This is exactly the kind of thing that our government is trying to eliminate, these low quality providers springing up and really giving students like these people to run around. I'm very disappointed that this has happened, and it's a blight on New Zealand's reputation as a provider of international education. I'm advised that the students do have the ability to apply for a visa that would allow them to work for up to 20 hours a week, which is what they've been entitled to while they were studying. I would certainly encourage them to apply for that visa. I am taking advice on whether there are other options as well. Haven't made any decisions about that yet.
Are you at all concerned by the fact that NZQA waited until the day before the students were due to finish studying before they were told there was any problems? The second time NZQA has done this.
No, I don't have responsibility for NZQA. My job is to make sure that that Immigration New Zealand is responding as it needs to. I'd encourage you to talk to the Education Minister about NZQA.
It is pretty poor though, from a government point of view.
Look, I really feel for these students. They are in a very difficult situation. It's not of their making, and I'm making sure that from the immigration side we do what we can to support them, and clearly there's a role for the education agencies to support them as well.
We've just had you announce all the post-study work right changes. How is that going to potentially address some of the problems these students have encountered?
Well, we as a government are focused on high quality international education. We want sustainable providers that are not going to be shut down because they provide poor quality education to these students. We want students to have a positive experience in New Zealand, to get a good education, to have the opportunity to work and to set themselves up for a good life and a good career. That's what our education system should be focused on, and under this government it will be.
Ian Les-Galloway talking to our political editor Jane Patterson. Now, NZQA said in a statement that its job is to ensure the quality of the non-university tertiary sector, and it will be hosting a meeting with Tasman later this week, but can't comment further as it's working, and I quote, to ensure the interests of the students are protected. We will obviously update you on that. It's 5:18. Indonesian locals displaced after Sunday's devastating 6.9 quake say it could be years before they could recover. Many tourists have now fled Lombok and the outlying Gili Islands, but they have somewhere to go to. There are 50,000 locals homeless and without an income. Bridget Burke reports.
Lombok is still reeling from the powerful earthquakes and aftershocks that continue to rattle the island almost 3 days on. Sunday's 6.9 magnitude quake brought down buildings and houses, killing more than 100 people, injuring more than 200 others and leaving more than 50,000 homeless. This mosque was left in ruins just minutes after the earthquake struck. Outside, dusty jandals have been left abandoned. Inside, officials fear at least 40 people remain buried beneath the rubble. Getting them out remains a challenge and a race against time. The Indonesian government is now prioritising getting more heavy machinery into Lombok by boat to aid the rescue and recovery process. And it's not just about rescue and recovery. Evacuations are ongoing to safely transport thousands of tourists out of the holiday islands of Gili, a 15-minute boat ride from Lombok. Here's Indonesia's National Search and Rescue Agency Director Bambang Suryoaji.
We have used around 3 boats to evacuate hundreds of tourists, but we also have
of tourists that are not willing to leave the Gili Islands, but we are monitoring them closely to make sure they are safe.
Tom, a tourist from Bulgaria, was on Gili, one of the 3 tiny islands off the northwest coast of Lombok, on Sunday night when the earthquake hit.
The second day we wanted to go to Lombok, but there was really trouble on the pier. There were too many people. Everybody wanted to get on the island at the same time, and the locals also wanted off. All the locals went off, all the shops closed. So we just said, okay, we're going to wait one more day to go off the island.
Officials said about 4,600 foreign and domestic tourists have been evacuated from the 3 Gili Islands since Monday. But as tourists return home, locals face an uncertain future with their homes devastated and income lost. Some residents say they're yet to receive any aid and have nowhere to go. There is no food and water supplies are running out. In Kayangan, on the resort island of Lombok's northern end, few buildings were left standing. Some villagers used sledgehammers and ropes to start clearing the rubble off broken homes, but others, traumatised by continued aftershocks, were too afraid to venture far from tents and tarpaulins set up in open spaces.
We might still be in trauma after 3 to 6 months. I don't think it will be easy to return to the normal life. We need to do it slowly, because the trauma was extraordinarily bad, like we dare not to sleep indoors.
The islands have been rocked by more than 130 aftershocks since Sunday. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
5:21. How often you buy takeaways and which kind could be influencing whether a landlord decides to rent you a house or not. New Zealand First MP Derek Bowel has recorded a property manager describing how landlords and property managers ask for bank statements from prospective tenants during the vetting process. Critics say this is unethical and paves the way for discrimination. Eva Corlett has more.
I do ask for bank statements to show affordability because I don't want to just put a tenant into a property and no sooner have they been put in, I can't afford the rent.
This is Rachel Cann, an Auckland-based property manager.
So I actually, like a mortgage broker, want to assess that they can afford that mortgage. They're paying somebody's mortgage. Right? And I see a lot of people who are low socioeconomic and their bank statements literally will read KFC, McDonald's, the dairy, KFC, McDonald's, court fine, the trucks that they buy, goods they can't afford. You know, I see a lot of mismanagement of money.
Ms Cann was talking to a select committee on letting fees about the practice of asking tenants for bank statements when she made that comment last month. NZ First MP Derek Bowel, who sat on the committee, was horrified by the admission.
It was clear that she was sifting through the spending habits of those prospective tenants and judging them not on whether they can properly afford the rent, but judging them morally in a values-based way, where they're spending their money, why they're spending their money, and how they're spending their money.
He says it's legal for a landlord to ask for any information to assess suitability, but a line must be drawn.
It's ultimately going to hurt the most vulnerable, desperate tenants that we've got. If we've got a property for rent that has 40 or 50 desperate tenants needing somewhere to live, they're going to feel obliged to hand over very private or sensitive information to landlords and property managers who are not qualified, who are not trained in any way to be able to make any sort of assessment in spending habits.
An Auckland events promoter who is of Pacifica descent says he and his friends were profiled when looking at a rental in Herne Bay.
There was 5 or 6 other people there. She then requested our account balances and then also referenced to speak with our employers. Obviously, I'm self-employed, so she'd just speak with me. We ended up giving her, I just showed her a screenshot straight off my phone, but I just found it was, it's just highly inappropriate and actually disgusting. I felt kind of like profiled as she'd not asked anyone else.
The Property Management Association President, Karen Withers, says asking for bank statements isn't standard practice in New Zealand, but she says it can be useful for landlords who want to be sure their tenants will be able to pay the rent.
Our job is to get a full rounded view of a tenant, not to judge them on how they spend their money, but whether they have the ability to pay the owner who we work for and fulfil the insurance obligations that they can pay the rent.
Ms Withers says tenants can refuse to provide that information if they feel uncomfortable. But Derek Ball says that won't happen if tenants feel under pressure. He says landlords have other vetting methods they can use, such as credit checks, references and the tenancy tribunal. And he's calling for an investigation into the vetting process to assess the scale of the issue and says consistent regulation is needed to protect tenants. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, says asking for statements and even pay slips could result in discrimination.
It gives landlords all the bargaining power, and with a legal framework where the rules are stacked against tenants, that's all bad news for renters, and that's why we've got a reform agenda to make life better for renters.
Mr Twyford says the government will soon announce reforms to balance the rights of tenants with landlords. I tāmaki makaurau mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko iwa ko let tēnei.
And we would love your feedback if you have had a similar kind of experience. Do text us 2101, 5:25. It's billed as the world's biggest and most extreme catapult. AJ Hackett Bungee quite literally launched its latest multi-million-dollar adventure tourism experience today in the Nevis Valley near Queenstown. The Nevis catapult is part bungee, part human slingshot. Thrill seekers pay, wait for this, $255 a pop to be propelled more than 100 metres out across a ravine. And as our Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown found out firsthand, it's not for the faint of heart.
Acrophobia is defined as the irrational fear of heights. But to me, standing in a pod accessed by a swing bridge, looking 130 metres down to the remote Nevis Valley below, it seems very rational. And many of the media troupe assembled for the launch today seem to share my sentiments. Unlike AJ Hackett Bungee's co-founder, Henry Van Ash, who is opening up the catapult by launching himself across the ravine.
3, 2, 1.
He tells me this is the culmination of years of work.
Well, over 30 years ago we did do something similar in France, and then over the last few years we were looking for something which was going to push the boundaries, and then we're just up to 30 years of doing commercial bungee, so we wanted to do something which would maintain our position at the forefront of adventure tourism on a worldwide basis.
The incredible concept is a world first, and possible thanks to $500,000 in government funding to help develop the launch system. The industry contributed nearly $1.5 million. The first member of the public to experience it is Chantal Polly, an Australian who won the privilege in an Instagram competition.
Right, Chantal, how are you feeling after that?
Oh, just amazing. I feel like the adrenaline's running through my veins. I'm just so happy.
Yeah, no regrets?
No regrets. Yeah, 100%. So glad I came and so glad I did it, and just, yeah, I can't wait to come back.
A self-described adrenaline junkie, she was never going to struggle. However, the third person to try it, Clutha Southland MP Hamish Walker, looks more like how I feel. A now ghostly figure, seeing Mr Van Ash has not helped.
I'm incredibly nervous, the mouth's dry, the shakes have started to kick in. I shouldn't have watched that first jump because it looks terrifying.
But once prone, there's no backing out.
3.
A snap is heard when the tension releases, and he's off.
To anyone that's scared of heights, you've got to come and address this. This is more than a tourism experience, it's actually a life experience. You've got to do it.
And you're still shaking a little bit now?
Shaking like a leaf.
Now the jumpers are rolling through. Before I know it, I'm harnessed up and tiptoeing towards the edge of the pod. About now, I'm regretting that I jokingly pitched to do this story, never thinking that it would happen.
Good up there? Yeah.
Oh, how wrong I was. You don't understand regret until you're confronting your fear of heights by doing the, quote, scariest thing I've ever seen, according to someone who spent last week watching people being flung across the Nevis Valley. So, are you doing it? I asked him. He tells me bluntly, don't be stupid. How reassuring. Join me now on the edge of the platform to hear what happens when a self-admitted scaredy cat confronts his fears.
Oh, Christ. 3, 2, 1. Holy shit! Oh! 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 Whoa! Wow, that is something else. The view is amazing, but the heart almost stopped. That's fantastic. I'd recommend it for everyone who wants to see their life flash before their eyes. Wow. Oh. Oh. For Checkpoint from 150 metres above the Nevis Valley, this is Timothy Brown.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. I really admire Timothy for doing that. It looked absolutely terrifying. Coming up on the program, Auckland secondary school teachers asked for a $100 per week housing allowance, waiting basically for living and working in Auckland. How is that idea going to float, and will it spread? Business confidence and a Labour government. Is pessimism inevitable or fair? Grant Robertson was speaking to a, well, we don't want to judge a book by its cover, but an audience that didn't look much like a Labour voting audience today. So I went down and had a chat to him about how he went and, well, people in the business community about how the government is going. It's a fascinating insight into, what, tribal tension or actually underlying economic uncertainties. Hospitals struggle to meet bowel cancer screening targets and much more, including Nona. But Katrina has arrived as I was speaking, looking magnificently calm and ready to go. So here she is with the 5:30 headlines, actually on time.
That's the problem. The government has confirmed significant changes to what it sees as the exploitation of the student visa regime. One is the removal of a visa foreign students can use to work here if they have an employer offer of full-time work. At the moment, new students studying at polytechnics and tertiary institutions can work for 2 years after studying, but that will be cut to 1 year unless they study outside of Auckland. Students studying at degree level will be able to work for 3 years on an open visa. A bowel cancer group says a lack of staff is delaying the rollout of bowel cancer screening. An independent review of the government's national screening program has recommended a workforce plan so hospitals can provide timely colonoscopies. The Bowel Cancer New Zealand spokesperson Sarah Derrett says there is a critical shortfall of colonoscopists and the situation is urgent. 15 of the passengers on a Taranaki High School bus that crashed this afternoon have received minor injuries. Of those injured, 11 have been taken by van and ambulance to Taranaki Base Hospital in New Plymouth and the other 4 to a medical centre in Stratford. The remaining students are being taken back to Inglewood High School and the police are advising parents to meet their children there. The Education Minister Chris Hipkins has warned a housing allowance proposed for teachers would raise expectations among other public sector workers. The Post-Primary Teachers Association is calling for payments of up to $100 a week for secondary school teachers working in high-cost areas. Chris Hipkins says the government would need to consider the knock-on effects of agreeing to that, and he'll get advice from officials on the proposal. The government is confident the United States' tough stance on firms doing business with Iran will not apply to New Zealand. The US President is warning countries that keeping trading with Iran that they'll not be able to trade with the US. But the Trade Minister David Parker says agricultural exporters should be all right, as US guidelines set out in 2013 exempt food from the sanctions. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks very much, Katrina. Appreciate it. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who's on the other side of me in the Auckland studio. Hi, Nona. Casino operator Sky City has made a record profit, eyeing hotel expansion, right?
Yes, and some online business too, perhaps, so that'll be interesting for the company. They made I guess their normalized profit, which takes out win rates and that sort of thing, rose 10% to almost $170 million. That's a record profit for the company. And yes, they're pretty positive about how things are going just generally. All their operating units were doing well. The Darwin business, they potentially have a buyer for it, so we'll wait and see what happens with that. They've been looking to sell it for a while, or they'll hang on to it because it still turns cash for them. Yeah, so overall, a pretty good result for Sky City, and they say that the International Convention Centre, which is part of the Fletcher building problem, and the hotel that they're building there is looking like it's tracking to time. It's going to be completed by 2019, they think, and for now, they're working together, and they're not in court trying to seek costs from each other, so we'll see how that goes.
Also posting a record profit, the ASB Bank, right?
Yes, number 3 retail bank in New Zealand. Big profit for them. $1.2 billion for the June year. That's up 10% on the year before.
Holy guacamole. Yeah.
So they had gains in both their lending and deposits. business, they're benefiting from sound economics. So though we are getting a lot of negative
weird,
surveys,
this is weird.
We're seeing some positives there. Good, low unemployment, resilient housing market is what the ASB is talking about. Interest rate margins are also healthy. And what else? Overall lending was up 6%. Deposits rose 7%. So yes, overall, this is a very good start to our reporting season, and you can expect a lot more over the next few weeks for sure. Overall, though, our market fell just 4 points, though not very much. And that, again, this is more about volatility in the region with trade and so forth. 8,872 is where we're at with our top 50 index. Dollars trading at 67.5 US cents, 90.9 Australian, and 52.1 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. We'll have more on business confidence, which should be booming after that ASB result coming up. Auckland principals are backing the PPTA's plan for a housing allowance for teachers working in expensive areas like Auckland and Queenstown. The union has tabled a claim for payments of up to $100 a week in pay talks with the Education Ministry. It says teachers who rent would be eligible if their school is in an area where average rents are 10% higher than the national median. Those who buy their own home would get the allowance for 3 years. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says he hasn't had time to consider the idea. But he warns that an allowance for one group of public sector workers will raise expectations among others.
If you were going to do something around, a geographical location for teachers and the cost of living in Auckland for teachers, then I think we would end up with an expectation that there'd be something similar for nurses and for other public service workers who would face the same cost pressures. And so we'd have to consider all of that in the discussions about whether that's something that the government would consider.
Despite the minister's caution, school principals are keen on the idea. Richard Dykes from the Auckland Secondary Principals Association hopes the ministry agrees to the claim.
It would be exceptionally helpful. Retirements are rising. We've got people leaving Auckland because of the cost of living. And look, it's really interesting. I've just spent the last couple of weeks visiting teachers' colleges around the country along with my other colleagues. And the recurring message that we're getting from trainee teachers from other centres is that the cost of living in Auckland is a major impediment to them coming to Auckland.
Richard Dykes says without an allowance, new teachers won't move to Auckland for work. He says it's significant that the PPTA has taken this step.
This is a big philosophical shift by the PPTA. Historically, they've been very much, we're a national body, we have a national salary, and I think it's quite significant that the PPTA has recognised the reality of hard-to-staff areas such as Auckland, and I'd really urge the Minister to recognise that.
Maclean's College in Auckland already pays a $100 allowance to new teachers and teachers who are new to Auckland. But its principal, Steve Hargraves, doesn't support the PPTA's claim.
This is a symptom of inadequate pay for teachers, and really I think what the PPTA should be focusing on is making sure that the pay claim raises teacher salaries, and then we won't need to be having fixes such as, a housing allowance.
The PPTA's Vice President, Melanie Webber, lives in Auckland and has argued for some form of housing allowance for several years. She says up to $100 a week will make a big difference for a lot of teachers.
It will make it possible for them to be able to live in Auckland. The allowance has been very carefully done in a way that it is looking at places where it is unaffordable to stay and is based on funding those schools directly to be able to help them with staffing.
The union's president, Jack Boyle, says it's not the PPTA's job to solve the housing crisis, but an allowance will make recruitment into high-cost areas a lot easier.
The idea is that where house prices are an additional barrier to recruiting secondary teachers or to keeping them in the community, then this is another way of just sort of making that a little bit easier. What we'd really like to see is for teachers to have some hope of living in the same community that they work in.
The union's negotiations with the Education Ministry are continuing. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Hospitals are struggling to deliver timely diagnosis for bowel cancer, and action is urgently needed. That's according to a hard-hitting recommendation, as part of an independent panel review into the National Bowel Screening Program in the wake of problems unearthed at the Waitemata DHB pilot. New Zealand has one of the highest rates of bowel cancer in the world, with 3,000 people diagnosed a year and 1,200 dying from the cancer. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
The panel was asked to review the national bowel screening program after news that 2,500 Waitemata residents failed to be invited for screening under a pilot screening program there. One person later died as a result of what was labelled a computer glitch. The panel chair, Victoria University Health Dean Gregor Costa, today cleared the pilot of any blame.
The pilot was well conceived, performed well, and in several respects was of a higher quality than other international pilots.
He says the rollout of national screening since that pilot is also progressing well. To date, Hutt Valley, Wairarapa, Waitemata, Counties Manukau and Southern District Health Boards have joined the national screening program. Nelson Marlborough will join next week and Hawke's Bay by the end of the year. Full rollout across the country is expected by June 2021. But the group's report says DHBs are struggling to meet waiting time targets for vital colonoscopy procedures needed to diagnose the cancer, and the rollout has been constrained by a shortage of skilled staff. Professor Costa says a workforce plan must be developed.
We need to be confident that we have sufficient colonoscopists. One of the tests of that will be that wait times for colonoscopies continue to be evaluated and are being met.
The panel is also calling for stronger project management, an IT review, greater clinical oversight, long-term funding for the program and a bigger equity focus given the low participation of Māori and Pacifica in the pilot. However, the Health Ministry head, Ashley Bloomfield, says the latest data from DHBs that are screening is encouraging in terms of uptake from key groups.
Already we're seeing in Hutt Valley District Health Board Māori participation rates of 50% and Pacifica 46%, so higher than in the pilot, and overall 59%, so nearly hitting that 60% target already.
But Bowel Cancer New Zealand spokesperson Sarah Derrett says the lack of a workforce plan is not good enough.
There have been glimpses of attention focused on increasing our nurse endoscopy workforce, for example, but those initiatives just haven't been comprehensive enough to address the critical shortfall we have here in our health system in terms of colonoscopists.
She also backs the panel's call for the Ministry of Health to rebuild sector relationships to support screening.
We have been frustrated to not be included in very sensible pieces of work that we could have usefully contributed to as a large charity with many, many patients and whānau members experiencing cancer.
The Cancer Society's Chris Jackson is another backing the need for workforce planning.
That needs to be a major focus to ensure that we have well-trained nurse endoscopists and high-quality surgical endoscopists and gastroenterologists as well who are supporting the program, and that we have enough people to investigate those people who've got symptoms.
The Health Minister David Clark says the review should give people confidence in the bowel screening program and that all the panel's recommendations will be implemented. Mō te hotaka o te ahi ahi, ko Karen Brownaho.
One of Japan's most prestigious medical schools has apologised after an internal investigation confirmed it had systematically altered entrance exam marks to limit the number of female students. Tokyo Medical University lowered test scores for women applicants and increased those for men in order to cap the number of women students at 30%. The ABC's Tokyo correspondent Jake Sturmer has the story.
For more than a decade, investigators believe the Tokyo Medical School automatically deducted points from the entrance exams of all female applicants. With a long, deep bow, the director of the Tokyo Medical University, Tetsuo Yukioka, fronted the cameras to say sorry.
We deeply apologise for having inconvenienced and caused so many people pain with such a serious scandal.
It's understood that the practice of subtracting points from female candidates was done to prevent a shortage of doctors at affiliated hospitals. The medical college believed that female doctors tended to resign or take long periods of leave after getting married or giving birth. Tetsuo Yukioka again.
Society is changing rapidly, and we need to respond to that. And any organisation that fails to utilise women will grow weak, and we fail to contribute to society.
Last month, prosecutors indicted the two top executives at the university on bribery charges. They were charged with allowing the son of a former top education ministry official to be admitted to the school illegally in exchange for favouritism in connection with a government subsidy program. An investigation by the university's in-house lawyers concluded the official's son had his score boosted by up to 49 points. It also showed the scores of men, including those reappearing after failing once or twice, were raised by at least 10 points. The primary exam had a maximum of 400 points. University student Yumi Matsuda says there's clearly more work to be done to improve the status of women in Japanese society.
The world's getting more equal than in the past, but we're still looked down upon as women. I really hope we get more equality.
Office worker Hiroshi Takagawa agrees.
I think it is a national problem. There are way too few women doctors too. We should be aware of this on a national and even international level. Japan can't be seen in this light.
University officials say they'll now sincerely consider their response, including the possibility of compensation, but they maintain they were unaware of the manipulation.
Jake Sturmer there from Tokyo, 14.5 to 6. We turn now to business confidence, about which there have been so many negative surveys this year. It's beginning to sound like a scratched record. Some of this is external uncertainty. This morning, President Trump, for example, announced he's placing another $16 billion worth of tariffs on 279 more Chinese products. There is an escalating tit for tat about all of this. But some of it is much closer to home, and the debate is about how much these surveys reflect the political distance between a Labour government and business leaders, and how much they actually reflect economic vulnerabilities. This morning, the Finance Minister spoke in Auckland to a group called the New Zealand Debt Capital Markets Summit. As much a Labour crowd as there too would be a natural home for a national speaker. But it was a balancing act speech. Grant Robertson is a Labour minister seeking greater connection with a not traditionally Labour crowd. How did he go? I asked him.
Oh, well, I spoke to this very same audience in Wellington in March, and you know, since that time I've met up with many of them over the course of the months and across the country, and there will be issues they disagree with the current government about.
Ain't that the truth? Looked back on, the months Grant Robertson refers to unfold like an increasingly unhappy Dear John letter. The headlines provide a kind of précis. January 16th, newsroom.
New Zealand business confidence drops on Labour policy concerns.
April 11, Otago Daily Times.
Business confidence in the doldrums.
June 5th, RNZ.
Business confidence outlook pessimistic.
June 7th, the New Zealand Herald.
Auckland business confidence in free fall.
And the following month, on July 3rd, in newsroom.
New Zealand business confidence hits 7-year low.
Why? Is it, as Labour supporters suggest, tribal divisions, or is it something more rigorous and empirical than that?
Look, some elements of it are tribal. We know that when the last Labour government was in place, business sentiment was pessimistic for about 82 of 99 months, but at the same time, growth was over 3%. So there is an element of that.
That detail, the last Labour government experiencing business pessimism for 82 of its 99 months, isn't accidentally to hand. Precedent is now deliberately being cited. And 1987 aside, Labour hasn't been a party that's often enjoyed strong business support. But is it simply tribal lines that lead us to this point? After Grant Robertson spoke this morning, there was a panel on the stage, and amongst the panellists, Stephen Topless, Head of Research for the BNZ. He sensed the Minister made some headway with his business audience this morning, getting to know you, to quote Mary Poppins. But they're not there yet.
Yeah, I think it is still a work in progress, but I think, you know, what he did this morning was he basically laid the ground rules for what the new government is trying to do. And in that regard, you know, it's often a wider business audience doesn't put it in that sort of wider perspective. And I think he achieved that by enlightening people as to the broader aims of the party and the government. But I guess there's still a degree of uncertainty that's out there in the business community that's going to take a little bit more work from the government before it settles down.
Is that tribal uncertainty, or are there underlying economic conditions that make uncertainty a legitimate setting? Christina Leung, Principal Economist at NZIER, says the answer could, quite reasonably, be both.
It's important to distinguish between two key measures that come out of business confidence surveys, such as our quarterly survey of business opinion. So there's the headline business confidence, and Finance Minister Grant Robertson is right in saying that you do tend to see a drop in headline business confidence in the wake of a Labour-led government taking office. Now, that's in contrast to a lift in business confidence when a national-led government takes office. However, there is this other measure, which is ask firms about their own trading activity, and that is the measure that actually has pretty good correlation with GDP growth. And what that is showing us is that it's eased to the lowest level since March 2013.
In other words, yes, surveys of business mood do reflect the fact that people surveyed don't often vote Labour.
But more concerningly, businesses are actually reporting an easing when it comes to what's going on in their own business.
So what's driving that? Well, it depends what sector you're talking about. Mycoplasma bovis, China-America trade wars, Trump versus Iran, Brexit, monetary policy and trading nations, they can all impact on the rural sector directly or indirectly, and very little of any of it has anything to do with government policy. But elsewhere, high household indebtedness, a levelling off of house prices, and increasing caution on the spending side does collide with government policy on the minimum wage.
That's affecting sectors that have a greater proportion of their workforce that is low wage, such as the retail sector, and that is where a lot of that pessimism is concentrated.
I put that to Grant Robertson. If retail spending is flattening out and labour costs are rising, margins will tighten. What do you say to them?
Well, that is one of the issues that has been raised. What I say is that New Zealand has experienced a good, solid period of economic growth, but there's a lot of people who've missed out. And as a government, if we are true and honest to our values, we want a more inclusive economy, one where everybody gets to share in success. Part of that is lifting the minimum wage, and we've given a very clear and certain path for that it'll get to $20 by the time we get to 2021. Business can then plan around that.
And raising the minimum wage was clearly and explicitly Labour policy. People who voted Labour voted for that. Nevertheless, it is a factor in business costs, although people earning more spend more too. But taking stock of all factors, where does the economy stand? Stephen Topless.
Yeah, I guess we're probably at the closest to the edge that we've been for a while, would be the best way of putting it. At this stage, we think that there's sufficient momentum to keep things ticking over. I mean, you've still got very strong commodity prices. We know there's all this infrastructure build that has to happen. We've still got population growth, and importantly, we've now got a government that's injecting a substantial amount into the economy through fiscal easing. So you put all that together, and it's really hard to see the economy tanking. But concerns are certainly building.
Grant Robertson says part of what the government will do is respond in areas where the market hasn't always done so well. Vertical construction, for example, Mainsey or Fletcher Building, Ebert. In a country desperate for more construction, it seems a strange paradox that some construction companies have so spectacularly struggled and even failed.
And it has been underbidding, a race to the bottom, fixed price contracts. What we can do as a government is make sure that the bit we're responsible for, which is about 18% of that market, we're doing that responsibly. So we've said to our government agencies, follow the procurement rules. If you're doing things that contribute to this, please don't do that and change direction on that. More broadly, we've got to work with the industry on getting that clearer pipeline of projects. And this is something the government's very committed to, and we will make announcements about very shortly, is a different way of organising ourselves around infrastructure so there's a clear pipeline, people can see where the government's heading, what kind of expenditure's coming down the line, and make their investments accordingly.
And Grant Robertson says Labour is directly addressing areas of labour market vulnerability.
I mean, you've got access to skilled staff, still the number one issue raised by business with me.
A Labour government does Labour things, but raising the minimum wage, helping people with accommodation costs, giving nurses pay rises, greater direct government spending, these all have their economic benefits.
And yes, there is some change coming with the government, but the things we're working on, getting to a low carbon economy, lifting the skills of New Zealanders, improving productivity, lifting research and development, they are the things that will help business. So, you know, those surveys are what they are, but as I go around the country, and I've done dozens and dozens of meetings and interactions with business, people are feeling good about their own business. Yep, there are issues that they might disagree with us on, but overall, I'm still really optimistic about this country's economy.
And from President Trump to China to Russia to Brussels to London and who knows where else, the issues may, of course, be bigger than New Zealand. As with the GFC, there are so many things potentially beyond our control that could impact on our commodity trading economy. Stephen Topless says surveys have their place, but in the real world, whatever your politics, business should simply be prepared for anything and everything now.
I just think that people need to recognise that the environment that we're operating at the moment is full of uncertainties, that the political process is part of it, but it's not the be-all and end-all of it. And certainly from a business perspective, we know that their costs are rising, and we know that they're operating in a world where it's very difficult to raise selling prices. So I think what we can say with some certainty is it's going to be a more difficult operating environment than we've seen in the recent past, and businesses have to acknowledge that, otherwise they could get in trouble.
Stephen Topless, Head of Research for BNZ. Getting to know you is from The King and I, of course. 100% my fault, that one. I just remembered Julie Andrews. Thank you for the 4.7 million people who texted in. Some Christchurch city leaders are calling for unkempt, messy and derelict parts of the CBD to be tidied up. It comes as the Crown rebuild agency Otakaro begins guided walking tours tomorrow to showcase the inner city. But as Logan Church reports, some people are questioning whether there's anything to show off at all. So we sent him, dear Logan, on a self-guided 2K tour to go and see for himself.
So we're at the start of this walking tour. We are on the corner of the Worcester Street Bridge. We'll go for a walk and see what we see. Walking through central Christchurch, parts of the city are bustling with activity. But between the good bits, there are also some not so good bits, including messy temporary car parks, broken buildings and empty lots. And that's something Christchurch Central Councillor Dion Swiggs wants to change.
We need to get on top of the tidiness of our central city, and one of my big focuses has been on looking after our central city and making sure that it is tidy. So some of these sites that aren't so tidy and that are derelict or not looking that great, we need to tidy them up, or actually work with the owners to tidy them up.
Inner city residence numbers are still only 2/3 of what they were before the Canterbury earthquakes. Local economic development agency Christchurch NZ have put together a publicity campaign for the city, which this walking tour is a part of. The Central City Business Association's chairperson, Brenton Chase, says while there are great things happening in the city, pockets of empty, sometimes messy areas are still a problem.
Demand for developing a lot of the land in the CBD is very thin. The reality is that some of that land's likely to be vacant and undeveloped for some considerable time. So it's probably important just for the appearance of the central city that that land is landscaped or required to be kept tidy.
Now we'll cross the road and head down the middle of the new Central City Park. This area, known as Rowater Park, is part of the East Frame, a massive residential development that is not due until 2026. Work is only underway on a fifth of the 900 homes planned, and much of the site, which spans 5 city blocks, is empty. Some of it is being used for initiatives such as a mini football pitch, but a lot of the area is gravel car parks, some covered in mud and rubbish. Christchurch residents I spoke to on the walk were not impressed.
Progress is slow. What we've got, there's some really cool stuff like down Manchester Street here. This is really, really cool with the boulevard, but yeah, it's been really slow.
Do you think it's a bit bits and pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely so. Yeah. Absolutely.
You're looking at the edges of these buildings and you're seeing buildings 7-8 years on that are still derelict and the fronts have fallen off them, and there's definitely a lot of clean-up that needs to go on still with some of those buildings.
It's like the inner cities slums in the States.
Are you from the States?
Yeah, and some of those, derelict areas. I don't feel it's dangerous here, though. It just looks like it.
Government-owned rebuild agency, Otakaro, is the biggest landowner in the CBD. Otakaro's communications manager, Andrew Trevelyan, says work has happened, or is underway, to transform some of its empty sites.
I think there's a lot of that happening around the city actually. A lot of the gaps are being filled in with some temporary initiatives.
Dion Swiggs says organisations such as the City Council are going to have to find more ways to encourage landowners to tidy up.
What I'd like to see is actually outside the box thinking. So what can we do to those places that, those building owners or those landowners that have that land? Could we rate them higher for having empty sites? Could we rate them at what it would be to have a building on there? What's the maximum consentable building that they could have on? Could we rate them at that so that it actually encourages them rather than just sitting on the land and doing nothing?
Autocado's guided walking tours are set to begin tomorrow at 12:30 in the afternoon. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tanay.
I know I've said this before, but Logan Church is out of the Christchurch Broadcasting School. He's one of these fantastic young people who shoots, edits, reports, does the whole thing on his stories, and he does a wonderful job. And yeah, they're remarkable, these youngsters that RNZ is hiring. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batt and tēnei. The government has made the first strike against what it views as the exploitation of the student visa regime, confirming a range of significant changes. One is the removal of a visa foreign students can use to work in New Zealand as long as they have an employer offer of full-time work. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
At the moment, new students studying below degree level can work for a total of 2 years once they're finished, but that will be reduced to 1. However, if they study at polytechs or institutions outside of Auckland, they keep the 2 years. Those studying degree level will be able to work for 3 years on an open visa. Currently, students on 1-year courses like postgraduate diplomas can work after they're finished. The government had planned to increase that to a 2-year course, but has backed off that change. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The police are warning the site of a school bus crash in Taranaki could remain closed for several hours. 15 people needed medical treatment after the Inglewood High School bus crashed this afternoon. 7 were taken to Taranaki Base Hospital in New Plymouth and the other 4 to a medical centre. Serious crash unit officers are not expected to arrive at the site until 7 o'clock tonight. In the meantime, State Highway 3 is closed near the intersection with King Road and traffic from Inglewood is being diverted. The bus company Transit says its Taranaki manager is being briefed by the police at Inglewood High School. The government is confident the United States' tough stance on firms doing business with Iran will not apply to New Zealand. Having reimposed sanctions on Iran, the US president is pressuring other nations to follow his lead, warning other countries trading with Iran will not do so with America. The Trade Minister, David Parker, says agricultural exporters should be all right, as US guidelines set out in 2013 exempt food from the sanctions.
We want New Zealander companies who can legitimately trade with Iran to continue to do so, and the advice that I have had from MFAT is that humanitarian goods can be traded, including medicines and food.
The Trade Minister, David Parker. National's trade spokesperson, Todd McClay, says firms are likely to stay away from Iran given the uncertainty. Early results from the US state of Ohio indicate the Republican candidate is edging towards a very narrow victory for a seat in the House of Representatives. The by-election in the long-held Republican seat is being viewed as a mini-referendum on the president before mid-term elections in November. A bowel cancer group says a shortage of specialists is delaying the rollout of screening. The government has today released an independent review of the National Bowel Screening Program. It backs the program but makes 19 recommendations for improvements. These include that a workforce plan can be developed to help hospitals provide timely colonoscopy procedures. The Bowel Cancer New Zealand spokesperson, Sarah Derrett, says the situation is urgent.
There have been glimpses of attention focused on increasing our nurse endoscopy workforce, for example, but those initiatives just haven't been comprehensive enough to address the critical shortfall we have here in our health system in terms of colonoscopists.
The Health Minister says he accepts the recommendations of the review and they'll all be implemented. The Greater Wellington Regional Council has voted to make changes to its widely criticised new bus service just weeks after it was launched. A meeting of the Council's Sustainable Transport Committee today was packed with residents and city councillors expressing frustration with the service. A Dunedin taxi company has been ordered by the Employment Relations Authority to pay 4 drivers $100,000 in lost wages. Southern Taxis has been found to have treated the drivers as contractors to save money when they were clearly employees. The Labour Inspectorate notes that, at best, the drivers got the minimum wage for about 15% of the time they worked and had no holiday or leave entitlement. The Inspectorate says such sham contracting is a growing concern. RNZ recently reported on claims the practice is common with courier drivers, and some are taking legal action. About 80 protesters gathered outside Teagle's Auckland headquarters today to protest against its proposal to build a mega chicken farm in Northland. Teagle has applied for resource consents to raise 9 million birds a year, partly in barns 12 kilometres south of Dargaville. Kaipara locals, iwi and animal activists joined together, chanting for Teagle to stop the farm. Shane Campbell, who has tipuna buried at Kapehu Marae, says everyone is committed to stop the farm being built.
I know the family today, they took about 3 hours to come down. I basically stopped my whole work process for today to be here today to support this. It's too important.
Protester Shane Campbell. Teagle says it remains committed to working with the local communities as it works through the resource consent process. It's 6:05. Sport. The defending champion Southern Steel are welcoming the return of sharpshooter Jennifer O'Connell for tonight's elimination final against the Mainland Tactics in Invercargill. O'Connell was ill in their final round of the regular season, and despite already having secured a semi-final spot, they lost to the Northern Stars 65-59. Retiring captain Wendy Frew says in front of a home crowd for the last time, they won't lose again.
It'd be no better feeling to get the win at home in my last home game. For me, I'm just really trying not to get too caught up. It's a huge honour playing my last game at home in the stadium, you know, the Wendy Frew Stadium and stuff like that. But for me, I just need to make sure I keep grounded and put in a really good performance and hopefully do as much as I can to ensure the team gets the win on Wednesday and we get the opportunity to go back to back.
Wendy Frew. New Zealand's Sam Meach says he's putting his poor performance this morning behind him as he eyes glory in the laser class at the Sailing World Championships in Denmark. Meach had a day to forget, slipping from 1st to 3rd overall. With 2 races tomorrow before the top 10 medal race on Friday, Meach says there's plenty of time to get back to the top of the fleet.
Once we're in gold fleet like this, you know, you get a bad race, you move back a lot in the standings, and if you get a good race, you'll move up. So I think there's still a lot of racing left to go, but I guess, yeah, I'll just keep racing the way I have been and hopefully not make so many mistakes tomorrow.
Sam Meach, Logan Dunning-Beck and Oscar Gunn are second in the 49er class, which returns to racing tomorrow. That's the news.
Combating a crisis.
NZNO says there's 400 graduate nurses that are out there that haven't got jobs. That's one of the areas that we can come from. That's not the be-all and end-all of the number of nurses that are or may be out there.
Fighting for fairness.
We had 17-year-olds training people. They were training new workers and getting paid 2 to 3 hours less. That's not right.
In the middle of the action.
We were moving metre to metre, side to side, up and down. People were screaming and running away from instructors and trees.
Keeping a cool head. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Andrew Little discusses his vision for reform of the criminal justice system. And after 10, a history of sport and New Zealanders. In the sports we have made our own, with Greg Ryan and Jeff Watson. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Cloudy with scattered rain in Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay, spreading to Gisborne this evening, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the North Island, also Nelson and Marlborough, rain with some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in Taranaki and Waitomo. Rain easing to isolated showers overnight, then becoming fine tomorrow. For Buller and Westland, rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, clearing for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, cloud and patchy light rain, clearing this evening, but returning south of Christchurch tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today, high cloud tomorrow with patchy rain developing. Fiordland, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. And the Chatham Islands, a few light showers turning to rain tomorrow, heavy for a time. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Thank you everyone for being with us. We're going to look at the trading situation with Iran in a sec, but just before that, some breaking news. The driver, the 69-year-old driver of a school bus that crashed in Taranaki this afternoon, has died. The police are warning the site of a school bus crash in Taranaki could remain closed for several hours. Obviously, this is the same crash. 15 people needed medical treatment after the Inglewood High School bus careered into a ditch this afternoon. 7 people were taken to Taranaki Base Hospital in New Plymouth, the other 4 to a medical centre. Serious crash unit officers are not expected to arrive at the site until about 7 o'clock, so roughly an hour away still. In the meantime, State Highway 3 is closed near the intersection with King Road, and traffic from Inglewood is being diverted. Very sad news. The 69-year-old driver of the school bus has died. New Zealand's growing trade with Iran is under threat as Donald Trump vows to punish countries that do business with that country. Having reimposed sanctions, the US president is pressuring other nations to follow his lead, warning that anyone who trades with Iran will not trade with America. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
The value of New Zealand exports with Iran rose by more than 50% to $173 million in the year to June, with butter making up 86% of that. In return, New Zealand imported $6 million worth of goods, mainly dates. The executive director of the Dairy Companies Association, Kimberly Cruther, says the dairy industry is taking Mr Trump's threats seriously.
To date, there has been no impact on New Zealand dairy trade to Iran, but we are mindful that there might be additional complexity that starts to flow through.
Fonterra is a big dairy exporter to the region, but refused to comment. Meat exports are small in comparison, with only $750,000 of New Zealand sheep meat sold to Iran. The Trade and Economic Manager of the Red Meat Industry Association, Serna Karapiva, says companies wanting to trade with Iran need to do so with their eyes wide open.
There are no technical reasons why they shouldn't be trading into Iran, but it has to be a commercial decision made by each and every company that chooses to enter into that market.
ASB rural economist Nathan Penny says overall, Iran is a tiny part of the $55.5 billion worth of goods shipped overseas from this country.
Although it did have some potential, this may stint that potential going forward. But at this stage, it's not going to impact too much, given that we haven't really been able to get back into the market, given the short duration since the embargo has been lifted on Iran.
But the executive director of the International Business Forum, Stephen Jacoby, says Mr Trump's provocative approach will see the US butt heads with the European Union, which is moving to protect its firms that do business in Iran. He says that's another setback for open markets.
We're looking at a ticking trade time bomb. The future outlook of trade is looking very dicey, and New Zealand needs to be doing all it can to shore up its position in these troubled times.
The Trade Minister David Parker is optimistic that New Zealand's exporters will survive in Iran, pointing out that US guidelines set out in 2013 shows food is exempt from the sanctions.
We want New Zealand companies who can legitimately trade with Iran to continue to do so, and the advice that I have had from MFAT is that humanitarian goods can be traded, including medicines and food.
Nevertheless, Nationals trade spokesperson Todd McLeay says firms will probably stay away anyway.
Any uncertainty for a business is not good. With the US saying that they're going to sanction or target countries or companies that trade with Iran, even though it's legal, is too much uncertainty for New Zealand businesses.
The Dairy Companies Association says there are already signs shipping companies are changing their routes to avoid Iranian ports. The shipping firm Maersk has said it will respect the US's stance and has gradually stopped accepting commodities that are now coming under the sanctions. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
It's coming up to 13 minutes past 6. The Prime Minister and her deputy are refusing to answer questions about how much taxpayers might have to fork out for Winston Peters' legal pursuit of National Party MPs over his superannuation privacy leak. It's been revealed Cabinet agreed in February to pay the estimated $20,000 bill for the former ministers being sued by Mr Peters. Here's our political reporter, Joe Moyer.
It emerged late last year Mr Peters had initiated legal action against National MPs Bill English, Paula Bennett, Stephen Joyce and Anne Tolley the day before the September election. They'd been told about his overpayment under the no surprises policy, and Mr Peters blames them for leaking it to the media. In November, National's Chief of Staff wrote to the Speaker asking if legal costs could be funded out of the party's leadership fund. That request was declined on the grounds the former ministers would not have had access to the information if they hadn't been ministers. Mr Peters today refused to respond to any questions about the matter.
How much do you think this is going to cost taxpayers in the long run?
Well, it's sub judice and I can't make any comment about it.
Can't tell us how much you think?
You know what sub judice means? I'm not going to imperil this case by breaking the law, and I hope you guys don't.
Do you think there'll be reputational damage for you that taxpayers are having to pay already $20,000?
One more time. It's sub judice and I can't comment. And neither can you.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is also avoiding answering whether costs are going to climb for taxpayers as her deputy continues to pursue Ms Bennett and Ms Tolley.
Those are hypothetical questions, and this is also a matter before the court, so I won't comment on that.
The Attorney-General David Parker sought Cabinet's approval for taxpayers to fund the legal costs. Mr Peters recused himself from Cabinet at the time the decision was made. Mr Parker is also caught up in the legal battle as he has been sued as Attorney-General on behalf of the Ministry of Social Development as part of Mr Peters' case. Unlike his colleagues, Mr Parker did delve into potential future costs to the taxpayer.
I wouldn't be surprised if they make an application to the Crown for further covering their costs. If they do, that will be assessed by Crown law according to long-settled principles as to whether this arises in their personal capacity or as a consequence of holding ministerial office.
National Party leader Simon Bridges says the public shouldn't have an issue with picking up the bill.
It's actually something I feel strongly about. I don't think we want a situation where the only people that go into politics are the wealthy, who can afford these sort of risks. Actually, you want people from all sorts of backgrounds. And so I think, New Zealanders, as fair-minded people, when they think all this through, will understand that when ministers act as ministers, their costs and legal cases that can range from the legitimate through to the very vexatious are paid for by the Crown.
Mr Bridges says the cost to the taxpayer has already been halved because Mr Peters had to pay back $10,000 in costs to the Crown. Asked whether that was true, this is what Mr Peters had to say.
Well, everything else he's saying is balderdash, so why would this be different?
From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
The welcome return of the word balderdash to Checkpoint. Kaipara locals, iwi and animal rights activists gathered outside Teagle's Auckland headquarters today, protesting its plans to build the country's largest chicken farm in Northland. Teagle has applied for resource consents to raise 9 million birds a year, partly in barns 12 kilometres south of Dargaville, near the northern Wairoa River. But that's been met with strong opposition. Jessie Chang was there.
We don't want your stinky farm. That's the sound of around 80 protesters, armed with signs saying "Click off Teagle" and "Teagle's foul play," as they marched through Auckland's Newmarket towards Teagle's offices today. A hearing about its proposal was originally set for today, but was delayed by Teagle, who requested additional time to respond to issues raised through the consenting process. It has previously told RNZ it needed to get more data on odour modelling, which could take months, because the technology it wants to use is in Europe. Rosie Donovan lives in Dargaville and made the 3-hour journey to Auckland to march and protest against plans for the mega farm. She says locals had been ready to present their case at the hearing.
And Teagle has suspended it and basically put us all into limbo, not telling us when the hearing will be rescheduled for. And these stalling tactics they're not good enough, and we're just going to keep the pressure on until Teagle pull out.
Kapehu Marae is also firmly against the farm and says the chicken sheds will be close to the urapa, also known as their cemetery. Kuia Betty Shine has been at all the protesting meetings so far and says she'll continue to fight for future generations.
Our marae, our mokopuna, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, so they're free to come home and walk the lands that their tupuna have walked on without anything of the smelly stuff that's going to go on down there, and the burning of 40 tonne of poo and dead chickens a day.
Shane Campbell, who has tipuna buried in Kapehu Marae, says he's protesting on behalf of them.
I'm here to tautoko that kaupapa for them because they can't be here. I'm here to speak for the people that can't speak, and that's my ancestors that are buried in the marae.
Tegel says it remains committed to working with the Arapohoi and wider Dargaville communities as it works through the resource consent process. It has previously told RNZ that while there has been opposition to build the farm, it's had support too. Nobody from Tegel came out to front the protesters today, but the company says it acknowledges the right to protest peacefully. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko te Chang tēnei.
Greater Wellington Regional Council has today voted to make changes to the highly contentious new bus service just weeks after its implementation. Today's Sustainable Transport Committee meeting was filled with residents and city councillors expressing frustration with the service and demanding change. This follows the release of a new report which measured how successful the new service has been and recommended adjustments be made. Reporter Charlie Drever was there.
It's difficult to find someone in Wellington who doesn't have a story about the new bus service, and today's jam-packed Sustainable Transport Committee meeting was no exception. City Councillor Simon Wolfe told the committee of just some of the stories he's heard since the new bus service was launched last month.
One cafe in town was 130 coffees down on Thursday of last week. And that cafe believes that it's the public transport network. Sarah from Miramar had a cheek-to-cheek experience, not the right cheek to the right cheek. Because of the capacity in the buses, they're so full. And this is Miramar, and people are taking the airport flyer to have a more comfortable experience.
One of the routes which received the most complaints was the number 18 Miramar bus. Bill Guest of the Karori Association says during public consultations, passengers gave feedback on the route, but part of the service was still removed.
Many felt aggrieved they've been ignored. We can't say whether restoring 18 is the best solution because we don't have the data, but we do support restoring 18 as soon as possible. At least that takes us back to the status quo.
City Councillor Diane Calvert says there's been an overall lack of public consultation.
The last formal consultation that they did was back in 2014-15 and there were a number of concerns expressed. I understand they made changes to their intended routes, but they never came back out and talked with the people who will be using it.
An extension of the number 18 route was among the recommendations made today, as well as improving the capacity of the buses, as smaller buses are being used instead of the larger buses which were originally contracted. Wellington City Councillor Chris Calvi-Freeman says he's happy the Regional Council has fronted on the issue.
The regional councillors have admitted that there are issues. They have acknowledged there are urgent issues that they need to fix, and we in the city will support them on that and try and help them on that. But this is a watershed, that there is an admission, an acknowledgement that things are not working well and they need to be fixed.
Regional Councillor Sue Kedgley says the Regional Council needs to apologise to commuters and make changes swiftly.
I won't be happy until there are not people in Hataitai, 60 of them, standing waiting for buses that are flying past them. We just have to fix the problems, immediately, or people are really losing confidence in the entire network.
But Chair of the Regional Council, Chris Laidlaw, says it will be no easy fix.
We're taking it all on board and we're going to be instituting some changes. It's not easy to do that because we don't own the buses, so we have to rewrite the contracts that we have with the bus companies, and that can't be done tomorrow.
In the meantime, many commuters will continue to get a little too close to one another, assuming the bus stops for them in the first place. For Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
Was it a drug deal gone wrong or the actions of an insane man? That's the question jurors will have to grapple with when they decide whether Gabriel Yad Elohim is guilty of murdering Michael Mulholland in September last year. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
In her closing address, Mr Yad Elohim's lawyer Annabelle Cresswell said her client had only been released from Auckland Hospital's mental health unit, Te Whetu Tāwera, 3 days before the killing.
You might well think he was still suffering from severe psychosis at this point, but Te Whetu Tāwera don't appear to want to take any responsibility for that release.
Ms Cresswell said he was hearing voices shortly before he kicked and stomped Mr Mulholland to death, and possibly even during the attack.
Halfway through beating the victim, who was clearly unconscious and barely alive, he thought the victim had spoken to him, so he returned and kicked the victim some more.
She said Mr Yard Elohim was still hearing voices the following day when he was arrested by the police and taken for an interview recorded on DVD.
Throughout this interview, he raised his glass or his cup of water to non-apparent stimuli in the corner of the interviewing room, and later had a long conversation with the spirit of the victim, talking about God, nirvana, and how this is what you wanted.
Miss Cresswell said her client had a disease of the mind. He's been diagnosed with schizophrenia and could not know right from wrong. She said her client has remained unwell and believed God had his back, that future was predetermined, and that the 12 jurors represented the 12 tribes of Israel. But the Crown Prosecutor, Kirsten Lummis, argued Mr Yard Elohim reacted angrily when he was ripped off in a drug deal.
He knew it was going to put Mr Mulholland in hospital for a long time. He spoke about months. He knew that he wasn't going to get up miraculously after he left the stairwell. He intended to put him out of action, to make sure that when he left that stairwell, Mr Mulholland couldn't retaliate.
She said Mr Yard Elohim had been after methamphetamine but lost his $200 after giving his money to a woman who ran off.
The motivation was revenge, retribution, not divine retribution, simple retribution.
Miss Lummis said Auckland District Health Board's mental health unit, Te Whetu Tāwera, was not on trial. She said the clinical director explained that the unit was full and that in his opinion, Mr Yard Elohim was not psychotic at the time he was released. She said forensic opinions and hindsight suggests that's unlikely to be correct.
I mean, it is a very sad indictment on our community that we have just the 56 beds available for acute mental health, and that it would seem it sometimes doesn't appear to be enough. But that is not what this trial is about. It's about what happened in that stairwell, the actions of Mr Yard Elohim in that stairwell when he kicked and stomped Mr Mulholland to death.
Ms Lummis said it was significant that after the attack, Mr Yard Elohim went to Karangahape Road to get his fix of methamphetamine.
Truth really is often stranger than fiction. Crazy, odd, misguided, yes, but legally insane, the Crown says no.
Tomorrow the jurors will hear Justice Van Bohemen sum up the case before they retire to consider their verdicts. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gayahau.
6:26 to California now, where firefighters are facing down 17 major wildfires across the state. 14,000 firefighters are now attacking the blazes on the ground. CNN's Andy Rose reports.
The Mendocino Complex fire is now the largest in California history, doubling in size in just the last few days. So far, it has scorched an area larger than all of New York City's 5 boroughs put together.
We're working as best we can with the resources that we have to manage this, but Mother Nature has taken its course and we've needed to adapt to it.
The Mendocino Complex fire in Northern California is actually made up of 2 separate fires. Thousands of residents are under evacuation orders as neighborhoods are reduced to ashes.
Where else are we going to go? I wanted to be as close to home as I possibly can. I have 50 chickens out there, and I'm hoping that they're being fed.
In Southern California, a new wildfire in Orange County called the Holy Fire quickly spread. One man says he had 5 minutes to escape his cabin.
We're in the cabin only 5 minutes, but that 5 minutes, the flames had already come up over the hill because we kind of go down the hill like they were already coming over the hill, so those cabins are gone for sure.
Another major fire also burning in Northern California, the Ferguson Fire, extended into its 3rd week, forcing parts of Yosemite National Park to close indefinitely.
So there's a lot of dead and down fuel out there. We have a lot of trees. We have a lot of other grasses and fuels that are helping to fuel this fire. This is normally a very busy time for Yosemite National Park. We usually have visitors from across the world coming to enjoy the park in July and August.
National Park Ranger Jamie Richards heading that report from CNN. Just before we go tonight, we're going to go back to Inglewood and Taranaki, of course, where a 69-year-old school bus driver has died following a crash this afternoon. The students on the bus were from Inglewood High School. Our reporter Robin Martin has just spoken to the school principal, Rosie Maben. She says the accident happened after school.
There were 13 high school students on the bus. None of them were seriously injured. All were taken to either Taranaki Base Hospital or the Inglewood Medical Centre to be checked over. And our local community has been wonderful in its support, and we're really grateful for their respectful response.
Any idea of what happened? What happened to the bus?
None at all.
What's the status of the bus driver? Have you been informed about that?
My priority is the students at school.
Have you had any feedback from the children about what happened?
Not yet. We are on our way up to Taranaki Base to talk to our students. The ones that were at Inglewood Medical Centre have gone home with their parents. They're all fine.
That was School Principal Rosie Mabin speaking to Robin Martin. The police say serious crash unit officers are not expected to arrive at the scene until about 7 o'clock, it's half an hour away. State Highway 3 is still closed near the intersection with King Road, and traffic from Inglewood is being diverted. So a 69-year-old school bus driver died in this crash this afternoon, taking students home from Inglewood High School. So much feedback from people in Wellington, very, very, very unhappy about the bus situation. You will have been delighted by Charlie Drever's report that a change is on the way. We really appreciate your feedback. 2101 is the text number. It works for every Radio New Zealand program that is on air on national radio at the time. We're delighted to hear from you. I've had a bit of an old coffee night tonight, coughing away, hacking away like an old horse. So let's spare my voice and wind up the theme and end the program on behalf of the Checkpoint team with the music of James Milne, aka Lawrence Arabia. Thanks for being with us.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government has confirmed several major changes to student visas to combat what it says is exploitation of the foreign student scheme. The driver of a school bus which crashed on State Highway 3 in Taranaki this afternoon has died. The police say the road will be closed for some hours. A bowel cancer group says the government's national bowel screening program has been delayed by a shortage of specialists. The government is confident New Zealand food exporters won't be affected by the United States' tough stand against firms that do business with Iran. Wellington's Regional Council has voted to make changes to its new regional bus service just weeks after it was launched. And 3 firefighters who were taken to hospital after clearing up a chemical spill in a Christchurch factory this morning have been discharged. Our next news and weather is